that over there. Dobry den, mili moi. Is that right?
Great.
I come with love. My name is G. That's my real name. My parents were hardcore minimalists. And I'm from this place called New Zealand. It's a real country. And you might have seen this. You're fairly familiar with the haka. Yeah, do you like that? Because we're going to do it together. I'm going to get everybody to stand up. We're going to do an ancient battle breathing exercise. Come, stand up, stand up. Cool. That's it. I see you. It's not that big. Okay. Right, cool. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with our arms up like this. And you're going to do massive breaths into your belly, into here, and then out, okay? So when you breathe in, your arms go up like this. And then 3 times, okay? And then we clap 3 times, and then we go, hoo-way. Okay, I need to hear it. Can I just hear the chant first? Hoo-way. 3, 2, 1. Oh, Slovakia. Come on, you can have a bit more power than that. You guys ready? 3, 2, 1. Okay, very good. Arms up. And 3, 2, 1. Clap. Hoo-way. Beautiful. Have a seat. I made that whole thing up. It's not about anything. I'm some Chinese guy that was born in New Zealand. So let me just kick off and say that I did that because I want you guys to be here for the next 22 minutes. You guys are the most important people in the room. It's you. I'm here for you, right? And I'm going to take you on what I call a circular journey. Yeah, anyway, I'm a dad. So let's kick off with the story right away because we actually don't have that much time. So just over a decade ago, one of my best friends was opening a pharmacy in Cambodia. And, well, no one was going to go to a pharmacy grand opening. It's not a very interesting thing. So we thought, let's do a big street festival, and put that right in front of the pharmacy so all the locals come out and they go, oh, there's a pharmacy. Perfect. And that's all my job was. And about just over a decade ago, like, environmental impacts on things were not things that were top of mind for me. I was in business. I had a clear business goal. I had to do it. I was not thinking about the environment. And we had over 1,000 people rock up in less than 2 weeks' notice. So that was really successful until the end of the event where, they'd already started cleaning up and tidying it away, but the original image would have been more like this. Just from 1,000 people across a 2.5-hour period, there was so much trash. And in my mind, it wasn't a, yay, I got lots of people. It was a, oh man, I did this. Right? So that kicked off a decade of self-funded experiments from what you see here is like solar-powered mobile refilleries. So the idea was that we went to service telcos and all sorts of companies, and we were refilling dishwashing liquid, laundry soap, and things like that, and removed thousands of bottles away from the ecosystem. And while doing that with as little emissions as we could possibly do, so experiments like that to some of Cambodia's biggest food festivals, which were all social experiments on waste management. So these events, at one point, we had 200,000 people in like 3 days, and all we were doing was like experimenting on them. So at one of these events, for example, we had half of the event with tables and chairs, and the other half of the event with picnic mats. All things equal. Distance to vendors, distance to parking, distance to activities. We had 95% less litter on the picnic mats than the tables and chairs. Isn't that interesting? Yeah. Well, you're going to have to come back next year for the rest of that story because we don't have time. So I'm gonna keep going. So naturally, what we did with that festival, because it was very successful, we expanded it into, not into Thailand, we went to New Zealand because that's the next natural, logical location to expand it to. And what we did was we ran 2 packaging-free food festivals. So we said, let's take the experiments to another level. And we had hundreds of people, and we had less than 10 kilos of waste. Less than 10 kilos of waste, and we did that twice just to prove that it was possible. And around the same time, I was head of sustainability at New Zealand's only diamond certified waste provider. So it's like a premier waste company where I took some of these experiments to a larger system size level and started meeting the right people. I started getting on TV and press and really showing and doing some of the advocacy and showing that it was possible until we found that actually it was financially impossible. So the more research we did, the more it actually came out that this was actually not something that could actually work. And so we interviewed over 50, just in New Zealand, there was like over 50 event and waste professionals, but we actually interviewed people all over the world, and they had the same problem that we had. The first problem that you're gonna see is that a lot of these community events that try and go packaging free and things, they rely on volunteer hours. They need people coming out, come on, then they have to wash dishes, they're collecting, they're sorting waste, right? And if you had a bit more budget, you could probably get more material so you don't have to wash fast enough to get it to the vendors to keep using, right? But then community events don't have that kind of budget, right? Secondly, you gotta meet health and safety standards. So that means that the what we call tableware or packaging, let's say, has to reach 72 degrees in washing, 80 degrees for sanitization. So if you're at outdoor events, that's not an easy setting to replicate. And then afterwards, because you're trying to be environmentally friendly, you need to collect all of the what we call gray water, but that's like the wastewater, right? So after all the washing, what do you do with the water? Do you just dump it in front of the school or whatever you were doing this at? That's not possible. And the big one there was return rates. So some of the serviceware costs up to 10 times more for higher quality packaging than it does for the single-use stuff, right? So at these sort of scales that people were doing these in, it just wasn't financially feasible. So what we did was we thought, okay, maybe at the individual scale it's not gonna work. So if we zoom it out to, say, the top 28 companies in events, event management, venue management, and catering, that it could work. So the numbers that I'm gonna show you very soon, they were all just for the top 28 companies, not for the rest of the market, and certainly not for franchises like McDonald's and Burger King and KFC and things, okay? So just know that we're scaling up to a city-size scale, but not yet with the full market, okay? So keep that in mind. It turns out that those 28 companies spend over $1 million on coffee cups, little chip boxes, salad boxes, soup boxes, and things. $1 million just on that. So we thought, surely that's enough to cover salaries and washing and insurance and vehicles and things like that. And so, you know, all these things that you're gonna see just here. All this stuff, I know I'm screenshotting a very big sheet on the screen right now, but I'm giving access to everything. So I'm just letting you know this is what it looks like, and you can take a look at the details later, right? So we thought, hey, if that's their current spending and we can charge as much as single-use packaging, there's actually no reason. You have a significantly more environmentally positive solution that's the same price. It should work, right? And our initial findings and conversations with the city council and other interested people in the market went really, really positive, because the city council's like, that helps meet some of our mandates. We can even give you some space in the city rent-free. And we're like, cool. Spoke to some of these stadium managers, and they're like, hey, you can literally take that location rent-free because we have the space for these things, but we never knew how to do it. So we're like, great, so this is working out. We spoke to New Zealand's biggest banks, and they said, hey, you're looking for a $2 million CapEx. Half of that can come from our CSR fund already, because this is the exact kind of stuff that we're trying to do for the environment, and the other half will qualify for green loans. So I was like, okay, this is really starting to work out. And from the political perspective, now, this is where I need to do just a little bit of education here. The paper packaging that you see, a lot of it comes from places like Indonesia, and a lot of it is hydrophobic, because you can't possibly put a hot coffee into a paper cup and not have it soak through. So what does it have inside the paper? PLA for that one, so that's a renewable form of plastic, but still plastic, right? It's close. And this here is PFAS. PFAS or PFOS inside it, so that if you have a liquidy salad in the dressing, the oil and the moisture doesn't soak through. I mean, it's paper. How could it possibly hold liquid? So they put all kinds of chemicals in it that we know are carcinogenic to society. The New Zealand government knew that in 2018 and published their standards and said, we cannot put stuff like that into our organic compost anymore because they have what you call curbside recycling and things. And so at every block or every house, they would put pizza boxes and things like that in there. And they said, we cannot, because what's happening is that the city composters, they cannot get rid of the compost. There's no farmer, no school, no organization that wants to buy that. So they were stockpiling this to send it to landfill. Right? So they actually had a really, really big problem on their hands. So they thought, what a great idea. If we can go circular and get rid of that at all of our events, if we go circular, this is perfect. So at this point, we were thinking, man, this is starting to really get some legs. You know, how great. And by the way, in English, that's a saying for it's got momentum and things, not that the cups have legs. So at this point, it goes wrong again. So if you haven't heard of a RAID analysis before, this is something that you should take a photo of. Because if you're in strategy and you're a C-suite, do a RAID analysis for decision-making, events, or if you just need to strategically counsel your board or things, they're looking for your understanding, especially if you're pushing any initiative. They need to understand a high-level summary, risks, assumptions, issues, and dependencies. And it turns out we had a lot of assumptions and risks. So the first one, and actually the biggest one, was return rates. And at those two packaging-free food festivals that I ran, we had 100% return rates, but it turns out that is like a global outlier, right? So when we started doing those interviews that I was saying before, it turns out that return rate drops down to 30%, which means that if you had 10 items, people were taking 7 of your things and leaving with it, right? And if that happened every day during high season in summer, my God, you'd be just burning money every day. Even if that happened across the whole season, losing 70% of your assets is just not sustainable, right? So who wants to take a wild guess? Put your hands up if you think that a return rate of, let's say, over 50% is good. Yeah, over 50%. Keep your hand up if you think that the best return rate is over 80. 90, yeah, 95. Yeah, that's where it is. The best return rate sits at 95% or higher. Anything lower than that isn't going to work. And that's at music festivals, food festivals, whatever you name it. And so we landed on, and this is research that you're going to have to do some digging on later. I'll send this to you. But the two materials that we looked at for using the system, this fleet, is polypropylene and stainless steel in the end. And for Christchurch, which has 400,000 people, we looked at a fleet of about 120,000 of everything: forks, knives, teaspoons, big spoons, small spoons, cups, plates, and bowls. And a 1% return rate difference is tens of thousands of dollars. So if you lose even 5%, that's like that could go up to $100,000, depending on which of those things that were lost or not returned or even broken. And unfortunately, no matter at what scale you go to, no matter what amount of volume that ends up at, it never converges. At no point will a circular system be cheaper than a single-use system. And that's still not the biggest problem. The biggest problem is still and always will be people. So all business and sustainability problems are people problems. So with the return rate, that's a people problem. Adoption and resistance from vendors to actually use it in their business, people problem. For policy advisors to actually say, hey, we're gonna make a guide or make vendors at our events in the city on our grounds use this, still a people problem. Even if Christchurch City had this history of putting out innovative policy, because about 10 years ago, they came out with the CFPE, which is the compostable food packaging guide for vendors. And about 10 years ago, this is like one of the world's first, that an entire city made all of the vendors at their events say, no, you have to use this, or you cannot come to the rugby game, or you cannot go to Snoop Dogg's concert. You're only able to sell if you use compostable packaging. So a really, really problem there. So what do we do? Nothing. Thank you very much, guys. It's been great. No, I'm kidding. So, empathy. So it takes people to solve people problems. Even AI needs to sound like people to connect and influence people, right? So we're going to do a light pivot here just to talk about empathy, because the empathy that I'm talking about is a deep empathy, right? Not the usual empathy that we're hearing. So there's 3 levels that we're talking about here. The first one, which is the usual definition of what you hear, which is the ability to put yourself in the shoes of others, right? The second level, which is like Brené Brown level, she says you need to then choose to believe what that other person says. So if that person is your customer or your client, they're saying, hey, I was doing the onboarding part of your business, and honestly, I found it kind of frustrating. And then your boss is like, I did it. I didn't think it was frustrating. That's not empathy, right? Because you're not choosing to believe them. Empathy at that moment is to get curious and go, hey, so you found it kind of frustrating. So what about that was frustrating? Where in that did you find that frustration? Tell me a little bit more. What it looked like, what it smelled like, tell me more. And then the next level, which is to get so curious that you hear and you see what they're not telling you. So think Henry Ford and that famous quote that if he asked his customers what they wanted, they would ask for faster horses. We would never get innovation if all we did was ask people, what do you want? What do you want? Man, they don't know what they want. That's why you need leaders. People who can think creatively and go, man, I'm seeing those problems, but you know what I think you need? I think you need this, right? So the examples that I had, and I wasted so much money. No, I invested so much money. Let's reframe. So, in one of our festivals, this is an example of the shallow empathy that we did. So, we gave up to 90% of the vendor fee back. So this was over $200 US. And in Cambodia, where the average salary is like $160 per month, we were like, $200 for 2 hours of waist training? Dude, that's awesome. Out of 110 vendors, do you know how many vendors actually turned up? Less than 10. Less than 10. And we were like, you don't like money? Isn't that why you're in business? But it turns out time for small business owners with children and, oh my God, and staff not turning up to work and all this. This was so much bigger than like $200. I'm going to make money at your festival. Lots of people will sell out. It's worth the $200. Didn't see that coming. For the policy advisors in Christchurch, man, we were lobbying for ages. And the same people who pushed through that policy were still there. And we talked about it. They said, yes, Christchurch is innovative, but local government, 3-year election cycles, lots of politicking, and now a bit of a global underlying right-wing type of dialogue going on. So anything environmental, for some weird reason, is now classed as woke, right? And you've got counselors having to defend every single line item in their budget and trying not to raise rates. And they're like, no, this is too much. We're already fighting over bike lanes. No, this is too much. So a lot of problems at every single stage, all people problems. So we thought, instead of seeing people as a liability, which we admittedly did at home for a long time, we turned it upside down. We thought, well, surely we can see people as an asset here, right? So it turns out that with a serviceware fleet of 120,000 of everything, and roughly 170 medium to large size events, that could be like 80,000 people events, per year, we would get over 2.5 million views and uses, on those things. So you can imagine for one brand, your brand proudly serving Christchurch at the bottom of that cup on every plate, every fork, every bowl, at every football game, rugby game, cricket game, every music festival, your brand. It's a lot of reach. And it turns out that, and this is a screenshot from the guy. I'm just showing you screenshots of everything so you see it was real and it's not just made up numbers. But this was a prudent analysis, right? So we looked at, okay, what if we could charge a little less? So not the $1 million, but let's say like 2 or 3% less to kick off a first year or first few year discount to get people onboarded, so it's a bit cheaper. Our OPEX is higher, not including the gigantic capital expenditure that we'd have to buy because every year you're going to get stuff broken, you're going to get stuff stolen. $120,000 every year. You have to keep buying stock, right? And so this is another thing is that you're probably thinking some of the best practice is that you do a deposit scheme, right? You put down a €1-2 deposit and then you get your cut back after you're finished. It's tricky in a lot of markets because if you're using your phone and you're going to get your money back on your phone, the financial regulator needs to have that policy and system set up, that infrastructure set up. And unfortunately in New Zealand, you're not allowed to do it. So we thought, man, like the biggest asset for getting return rates in New Zealand, we can't use it. So, okay, let's assume that we can never get that. So we said, all right, well, let's split up the sponsorships. Polypropylene, manufacturers will tell you that you can wash it hundreds of times before needing to be replaced. It turns out it's 20. Anyway, so you can see each time we got these little nuggets of wisdom, it was so depressing. So every 18 months we worked out with that big of a fleet, we would actually need to cycle through them. We could actually reprint logos. So we thought, hey, let's be prudent. Let's assume we don't sell any of the sponsorships on our stainless steel fleet, which was everything else. Polypropylene was just going to be cold cups, beer and soft drinks. That's it. Everything else, stainless steel. And we thought, let's assume we don't sell anything from there, and we only sell, let's say, $1 million contract for 5 years. That is cheaper than a billboard. Way cheaper than a billboard to be at every event. Have the brand right there with your messaging on it, right? So even at a prudent scale, we said, okay, we can still, not a lot, but we can still be cash flow positive with provisionary budgets, so like an oh shit budget, right? And we spoke to a lot of media people and they said, hey, look, you could easily bump that up. $200,000 a year is like nothing for something at a citywide scale. This is incredible, right? So that solved the financial part of this issue. Now comes the people problems, and I'm going to give you some examples, and I will share with you guys a custom GPT for free that you can do these exact things for any of these sustainability or behavior change initiatives that you might have. So the biggest problem we mentioned before was people, and so one of the first things that you do, as you know in tech, you do empathy mapping, you do journey mapping so you can understand what people's user flows are, and then you dive really deeply, and this is where you really need to be able to hold enough space for team members, your user and things to come back and tell you things you actually didn't want to hear, right? And once that happens, you can start putting that together and start mapping what the stakeholder journeys are going to be like in their different relationships. So that's you measuring twice to cut once, okay? And it feels anti-startup because startups are like fail fast, learn fast, break things. But in Asia, we see that as kind of failure. Like, why didn't you just do it? If you had the time and took an extra day, just do it right the first time, right? So a little bit anti-American of an approach there. So I'll DM me for the details there. And you would have seen this bell curve before, the diffusion of innovation, right? So this is going to be one of the crux of how you use empathy as a tactile tool in any aspect of your business. So basically, you target different people. You have different strategies and tactics for different people along that curve. And for example, what empathy teaches us is that you're inevitably going to get laggards and people who resist. But it turns out that's less than 2 out of 10 people, but they feel like they're 80% of the people. Super loud, and they're actually never going to come on your side. You look at that bell curve, well, of course, on paper, inevitably there's people here. So why are people sometimes so stuck on the policymakers get stuck here? Innovators sometimes get stuck here and they feel imposter syndrome because of people like this. This tells us, have a script ready for them. Don't waste your precious time on this. Come over here. You've got people, 3 out of 100, 2.5 out of 100, who are like willing and able to support. And if you can show that you've got some wins, then you move on to here. Then you move on to here. And when you get to this line, that's where you can standardize and put that into policy. Because 50% of people are saying, we're already doing it, why aren't you doing it? Right? So that's how you use tools like this. And you use empathy to extract that. And it should look something like this. right? So you have the RAID analysis that we spoke about before, and now you want to do the empathy thing. And empathy, a lot of it is about what people are feeling and thinking. So you can display that through text and just say, you can go to any LLM, put in the context and say, I need you to tell me not just what they're saying, I need you to tell me what they're not saying. And a lot of LLMs are actually capable of doing this already. So what's really going on? So vendor resistance, for example. Hey, I'm already stretched. You're asking me to change everything, and it might hurt my bottom line. I'm fearing more complexity and my own customers' dissatisfaction, right? And then you could prepare a mitigation response. So when you start doing that across that bell curve, you are significantly more prepared that if you had to go to your board or if you had to go to a sponsor or an investor, you've actually got all your risk mitigation strategies ready and you're like ready to tackle them. I'm here and I'm gonna get you to say yes. And I knew you were gonna say that and I've got that ready for you. We prepared that. Measure twice, cut once because you have one first impression, right? And when you do that, you start to identify really, really important pieces of information that initially you probably never thought of. Who's heard of the quote, "to kill your darlings"? It's like a famous, quote from writers. So it's not just to kill babies. It is that you get sometimes too attached to the things that you create, right? And the idea is that your first draft is never perfect. So if you know that you make 1 out of 10 things is like really, really good and you need 10 of those things, you need to make 100 of those things, right? And so that's why it's important to keep iterating and keep preparing those messages so that when you do turn up and you've got that 10 minutes for your pitch, you're actually ready. So here's the example here that in the initial arguments that we had, we actually didn't think of until we did that rate analysis. So what you're looking at here is still from the 28 companies worth of funding. And so we found that over a 5-year period, there's over $3 million leaving the city of Christchurch. It's going to Malaysia, it's going to Indonesia, right? And then there's $1.5 million staying because it's just trading companies. So, okay, they're paying rent, they've got some staff, they're paying storage, they're paying logistics. So that's how much money is actually staying in the city. Whereas with the reusable system, okay, almost $2 million goes out, but $5.2 million stays in the city with more jobs, less environmental impact and outcomes. For those of you who are math geeks, you're like, hold on a minute, G. There's a $2.1 million difference over there. So if you add those together, that's like 7 mil, and that's like 4 point something, $2 million difference. And the difference is that, do you remember that graph that I showed you? How it never converges? Turns out for us, for that city, that's a $2.1 million gap. It is more expensive to run a circular system, and we were also more prudent. We wanted to pay people well. We wanted to have good equipment. We put money away for maintenance every year. We want to pay our directors well. We want to pay people well. We want to make sure there's no children involved in our supply chain, right? Because if you start doing things like that, man, people, the laggards, they're going to be pointing holes at every part of the process, right? And if you're a great founder, you can be like, yes, give me those challenges and I'm knocking down, right? So that's what we had to do. So the learning from that $2.1 million difference is that not that circular serviceware is more expensive, is that we are not taxing single-use packaging at all. We're sending money out to import packaging for somebody to use 30 minutes at a football game to send to landfill. Our landfill. None of that is priced. But ratepayers have to pay for a new landfill. Where is all that money going to come from? Why are we paying for this? You made it. You pay for this. Or you, the vendor, you're the one who's trying to, I just want the drink or the food, right? So it's just that we're not pricing this well enough. So to summarize, I'm not actually sure how I am for time. So the clock hasn't moved, actually. So anyway, so to summarize, if there's anything that you walk away with, all businesses and sustainability problems are people problems, right? Exercise deep empathy. You solve all of these people problems with empathy, and it's not about being nice. You are confusing kindness, your values, for empathy. Empathy, when you do it well, gives you visibility into what other people are thinking so that you can work around it. It gives you information to make better decisions. So don't confuse the two. There's this famous idiom that the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And we see that in the development sector, we see that in the humanitarian sector. So I'm talking tactile empathy where you keep your ego and your own advice and solutions out of the way in order to get really curious, right? And if you can do that, right, you'll find lots of ways here to solve sustainability in a more profitable way for everybody. All right, and that's where we can start eliminating some of these problems. And some of you don't have to read that now, I can send slides. But these are the kind of problems that can get solved when you apply empathy at that level into these problems. So you might be wondering, why are you here in Košice talking about this and you're not in Christchurch hustling for this? Now, unfortunately, a year ago, my wife was diagnosed with cancer, right? So we moved back to Poland, and that's where my focus is. Got 2 young kids. And unfortunately, I haven't been able to take this much further. So don't give me that look. I don't need your pity. I'm looking for leaders and people who want to adopt this in their city or in their organizations or who are just curious enough, inspired enough in the last 20 minutes to go, hey, I would like to learn a little bit more and to see what I can do. Can't promise anything, but this is kind of cool, and I want to see what I can do with it. So at minimum, even if we don't turn Košice into a packaging-free city, if you can apply a bit more empathy in your work, man, that's a win, right? So I only have 2 conditions. And it's that you're willing and able to undertake the leadership that it takes to solve those people problems, and remember that it's people problems that you're facing. And secondly is to be strong enough to solve them with empathy. And if that's you, you are exactly the kind of people that I want to speak to after this. Thank you. That's where you get hooked up.
Mr. G, wow, what a presentation. Thank you very much. I hope this room and this conference is full of early adopters and innovators and a minimum amount of laggers. So hopefully you can find the right people here. But we have a few questions here for you. What are the factors that convinced stakeholders to say yes, that finally changed their minds? Is it the answering of their objections?
That's always the risk mitigation part, because every time that you speak to a sponsor or if you're asking for money, you're asking people for something, in the back of their mind, their critical thinking, if they're smart people, which you want to be talking to, they're thinking of arguments against what you're doing. So facts doesn't always help. You need to tell a really great story. So when you turn up, if you can communicate well, I should have slowed down a little bit more in the speech, but if you can do that and you can channel your voice a little bit, you can speak concisely, this is what's going to get people. That's why Trump is like in his position. Logically, he doesn't say a lot of things that make sense, but he is so charismatic and likable. So I'm not sure if you've heard, but there's a persuasion model called the elaboration model, where you've got one pathway which is logical, so you listen to logic, and the other one is peripheral, which is all about emotion and charisma, and that, if turns up enough, will override all the logic, and that explains these dictators and things like that that we're seeing. You should use that for yourself.
And I'll just add to that, charisma is something you can actually learn and train, just to add to that.
Yes.
And another question, you have mentioned something about the picnic mats comparison on the festival, how you put picnic mats and tables, and there was 95% less waste when you use picnic mats. How did that come about?
How did it come about was we did the journey map, right? And we said at every stage of that journey map, we said, well, what if we did this? What if we did that? So that's where that came from. And then what we did from there was just split it, and we just like took a look. We had 3 teams of research teams. One was just measuring waste. And then 2, one was speaking to people and asking them like, hey, what do you do with your litter, blah, blah, blah. And then another team that was just watching. So, okay, they interviewed them, then they would follow this group. And if someone like drank and then left it on the table, they would go, oh, Santabong, we just noticed that you, come on, you just left it on the table, and we want to ask you, you know why, but we did conflict management training for these people, because you're like, yeah, you littered, and you said you did it. So we had to do that training, and that's where we found that in Cambodia, and this is why you have to really localize a lot of your solutions. In Cambodia, if you go to the provinces, you go to Angkor Wat, you see Cambodians sitting on picnic mats on the grass. That's how they eat. At home, they're not sitting on tables and chairs. The French brought that in the 1950s. So they had this culture of when you sit together, you pack up together as a family, and you take it with you. And the other thing was that at such a big event with 200,000 people and the city is doing it together, you just feel like it's organized. Someone is paid to pick it up. So there was this level of complacency that we had to like design around.
Really interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, and that was the last question. So, Mr. G, thank you so much. It's been really great having you here. Put your hands, please, together. Mr. G.
Thank you, thank you.